So, Epic Games was hit with some layoffs, and I feel like it's a pretty notable point on a pattern of trouble that Epic Games has had recently that I feel like isn't really getting talked about broadly, right? Like, people have been mentioning some specific things, like, hey, it's kind of weird how Unreal Engine 5 games are having all these performance issues and stuff like that, and that other developer, Immortals of Avium, had layoffs, poor sales, and stuff like that. But there's kind of a broad story, a kind of important problem that's forming here. Like, you go back and there was, performance issues with Unreal 3 and 4 prior, but this seems a little bit different because, yeah, these issues are annoying for people playing games, but it's kind of a big problem when you're trying to sell an engine to companies, because they're looking at what's being done with it by companies who took the risk to use it first. Like, you look back in UE3 had Gears of War as like a big showcase of like what it's capable of doing, and that clearly worked because you had a bunch of games like Mass Effect Trilogy basically just follow up a couple years after, and Unity had a bunch of similar early successes with like City Skylines and Hearthstone, and Prison Architect that kind of showed its potential as just a very flexible engine for small game devs. But that kind of isn't happening with UE5. Instead, you have these games that struggle to get like 45 FPS on like 4090 on PC, and the studios using it are having layoffs. So why exactly would you take the risk of having your project use this when it seems like it isn't really working out so well for the studios that are trying it? And I'm not even like specifically trying to say like, oh, EU5 is like bad or anything, or the layoffs are like entirely because of this. It's probably just based on like combined future outlook of a bunch of different things. But it's really starting to feel like the kind of premise of UE5 is kind of flawed, right? Because like it's this entire idea that because a medium scale developer kind of grab these off the shelf tools and use the shortcuts that they've had with these systems to like very good looking games, game worlds and stuff, relatively easy. But the thing is, one of the big narratives to form in like the video game industry over the last decade or so has been the death of like the mid-scale developer. It just kind of has increasingly seemed like there isn't room between AAA games with huge budget development teams and marketing campaigns, broad appeal of gameplay and big IP they rely on, and small indie scale developers that can grab some attention, and it's enough to really recoup the small amount of investment they've made. But you have EU5 walk in with this premise of like, yeah, you can get something close to AAA if you just put in some work. And again, it kind of seems like with these releases that really isn't where the market actually is. There really was just not the demand for something like Immortals of Avium. And to be clear, it isn't just like Unreal Engine 5 games that are not working out and resulting in layoffs. It's kind of, again, a lot of medium scale games like the Calypso Protocol studio had layoffs after that game didn't really pan out. Like the Company of Heroes studio, the studio that makes those like Life of Strange games and was moving to like Telltale style stuff. They were kind of gone to fill that void. And like, Baldur's Gate 3 is like an interesting case of where, they just kind of succeeded because they kind of avoided this whole thing, right? Like they just leveraged, the success of their like previous Kickstarter campaigns to grow to like a 400-person studio, and basically achieved just AAA scale. Like that's how they competed. They didn't try to be like medium. They just tried to go toe to toe, and it worked out. Like I just kind of look at some of these like upcoming games that run UE5. Just kind of like there's one horror game, Quantum Error, that I heard about because they kind of were like delaying the Xbox release, so there's kind of lumping that in with like what happened with Baldur's Gate 3. But like you look at like their social media account has like 5,000 followers or whatever, and it's kind of like, are people going for this? Like, are people going for this model of UE5 medium scale games? It's kind of really starting to see that like they aren't. Or, you know, this one game, Ren Sport, it's a racing game, seems to have gotten some attention, but it's basically seemingly like releasing like a little bit after Forza Motorsports comes out, which seems like a bad idea. It's kind of setting yourself up for failure, but we'll see. That is a racing game, so there's also the whole car licensing situation, which is kind of a, you know, financial burden, which probably is not that great for medium scale games, but we'll see, I guess. It's not like there's, you know, no non-Forza, non-Gran Turismo racing sim out there. There's already kind of a decent crowded market, and maybe, you know, for UE5 in general, it doesn't really matter because they have a handful of big things. You know, like Square Enix has been using Unreal. Maybe that's fine, but you know, the model for a lot of these engines has been that just a pretty decent amount of medium scale projects have been using them, including from like, you know, a lot of big names, right? Like I said before, Mass Effect was, you know, an EA game, but EA's been one of the companies that's been really heavy on, we have to use our own in-house stuff. So even, you know, that idea of relying on just big studios using these outsourced engines isn't particularly stable, right? And there's, you know, plenty of examples of Rockstar using, what was it, like renderware for, you know, their like PS2 era games before moving to their own engines. That's just something that's been happening a lot. So, you know, again, these medium scale games are what UE5 was kind of focused on, just simplifying a lot of the things to make games possible that weren't really possible for developers of that scale, but just kind of inching a little bit closer to big budget games really seem like it's kind of saving this kind of dying segment, as opposed to just, you know, unique gameplay experiences, right? Like, I haven't fully kept up with everything EU5 has shown off, but it's all, oh, visuals, like photorealistic graphics, stuff like that. That's what all the tech demos are about. You know, using, you know, like quick world creation tools. It's like, okay, great, I can, you know, make a super generic open world game in EU5 that no one really buys because people are kind of sick at this point of just very generic, like Ubisoft copy-paste open world games, right? Like, it's just weird fixation with trying to up like visual fidelity of medium scale games as if that solves the problem of just them not getting attention. That just doesn't seem to be where the industry is, and really the market, judging from, you know, what happens with the games that have come out. I don't know, maybe this is just being overly pessimistic, and maybe there will be some big, you know, success stories, but I don't know. It feels a little bleak, the way things have been going, and the kind of fixation on, like, visuals that is resulting in these games that, like, 4090s get, like, 45 FPS in without upscaling, instead of, you know, things that are actually grabbing people's attention and being, you know, successful.